Greetings collectors and welcome to today's retro game review. You joined today in part 4 of the Alone in the Dark mini-series. During this series we'll be revisiting the original Alone in the Dark trilogy as well as the spin-off game Jack in the Dark, The New Nightmare, and we'll also take a shorter look back at more recent attempts to reboot the franchise. In the last episode we concluded the classic trilogy instalment of the Alone in the Dark series. An excellent first outing had led to a sequel that never really hit the spot for me personally, despite a wave of awards from critics of the day. The classic trilogy then dies out in the Old West in 1994. Whilst I admire the first game and can just about live with the sequels, gamers were all darked out. We'd had an Alone in the Dark game 3 years running now, and the series had hit a natural stopping point. The 3D engine that had served the first game so well now looked rather dated, and it was hard to see where the series would go from here. Especially as at the end of 1994, all the cool kids were getting into true 32-bit consoles such as the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. Alone in the Dark just quietly went away, although I dare say that it retained many of its fans. It wouldn't be until 7 years later, in 2001, Infogrames would revisit the series. To put this into context, by this time Resident Evil 1, 2, 3 and Code Veronica had been released, as well as the first Silent Hill game. The survival horror genre that Alone in the Dark had helped create had now grown up. It was at this point that gamers started hearing whispers of a project between Infogrames and Darkworks, a true Alone in the Dark 4 sequel. In 2001, Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare was released on the PlayStation, PlayStation 2, Dreamcast, PC and even the Game Boy Color. Despite a glut of survival horror series out there, fans were keen to see what the grandfather series of horror could come back with. This was a comeback for the series and well deserved. Edward Carnby is back, although now several decades in the future, this is actually more of a reincarnated Carnby. It was felt that Carnby himself should be a character that rises every generation to fight various evils. It's never really explained to too much of a degree, but I'm not going to complain, as it doesn't mess up the original premise too much. The premise of the game is pure blockbuster. Carnby's best friend has been found dead in a place called Shadow Island, and he sets out to investigate. This spirals into a rather far-fetched story fixated on 3 ancient tablets that have the power to unlock evil on the Earth. A young professor called Aileen joins the search, but ends up in an accident with Carnby after their plane is attacked.
The controls are dead! Put that up! We have to jump! Go!
Aileen ends up on the roof of a mansion, whilst Edward lands near the mansion grounds. It's a huge scope in terms of plot, and I can say that although slightly out of step with the classic trilogy, I like it a lot. So, how does it play? Well, I'll get the obvious out of the way first. It plays very much like any other survival horror game of the period. Expect the usual tank controls, inventory puzzles, and suitably startling jump scares. Overall though, I found the game to be really enjoyable. The combat is decent enough, the puzzles are challenging for the most part, and this feels like a very well put together game. There are a couple of areas in the game that stand out. Firstly, the graphics. Now, I know you're watching this several years after its release, but take a look at those environments. Not bad at all. Each area is really well realised, and the lighting effects from the flashlight really help blend the rendered and pre-rendered elements of the scenes. The star of the show though is the sound design. As with horror movies, decent sound design is king, and New Nightmare really gets this right. From the ambient sewer sounds to the rumbles of thunder, it all just works and holds up far better than many modern games in my opinion. I'm playing the PlayStation 2 version here, but would recommend the Dreamcast edition for purists as it is seen as the native development edition. However you play this one, I think that you'll have some good fun. In terms of a recommendation, I think that if you like what you see here, you'll quickly understand the appeal of the game. It's just a really decent survival horror game that never seems to make the top 10 lists for various reasons, and although canon in the loosest terms to the original trilogy, I certainly don't feel cheated. For those of you wondering, yes, New Nightmare was originally conceived as Alone in the Dark 4 rather than a spin-off. There had been previous discussion in the intervening 7 years, but plans never came to fruition. Despite the game's final release lacking the 4 numeral, Infogrames did leave us several clues as to their intent, one being the volume label on the disc itself. New Nightmare might have deserved a sequel, although sadly Darkworks didn't manage to survive as a going concern. As it is, New Nightmare is generally considered as a last hurrah for Alone in the Dark and Infogrames. New Nightmare is well worth playing and is a very credible tribute to the original concept of the series. It's also incredibly cheap, so ideal for gamers that want an Alone in the Dark experience but don't want all the hassle of the clunkier trilogy. Now, it's at this point I was going to give you 3 more episodes, but I just can't bring myself to do it. Mostly because I consider the Alone in the Dark series to be dead past this point. There were, however, 2 more games officially released: 2008's Alone in the Dark, a sort of shonky reboot, and 2015's Alone in the Dark Illumination, a sort of crap bag of fanboy incompetence that takes one last dump over anything the original series tried to aim for. Rather shamefully, I do have the 2008 reboot here. At £4.99 I was robbed. The game was meant to be a reboot of the series for a new generation. With Infogrames now gone as the publisher, the licenses fell to Atari. However, classic Atari as we knew them back in the day were also dead by this point in time, so this is basically a rebadged franchise using Atari's brand equity. Is it any good? Well, it's okay, sort of. Edward Carnby is back yet again, but remove the title and this really could be any other generic game of the late noughties. Gamers had a lukewarm reception, and the game failed to connect with the original fans of the series. To give you some indication, here's the front cover. 4 out of 5 from Maxim magazine, and 4 out of 5 from FHM magazine. Wait, those are fairly decent scores. Well, they would be, but for the fact that neither Maxim or FHM are computing or gaming magazines. They're basically what we call lads mags here in the UK. We might as well have had Fishing Monthly give us the lowdown on the latest Zelda title. When you can't even quote an industry magazine for a reference, you know you're in trouble. Ultimately, gamers saw through the mediocre gameplay and the franchise died once more. That brings us on to 2015's Illumination. Now, if you want to kill a franchise, and I mean really bury it good, this is how it's done. The game single-handedly managed to be released in a broken state, had almost nothing to do with the Alone in the Dark series, and suffered from chronic gameplay and reviews. To top it off, as at the time of making this episode, the game is still on sale for £14.99 here in the UK Steam shop and $19.99 in the US. I won't be reviewing this one as you'll find various gamer rants online, but I did want to give you some closure to this miniseries. So, what have we learnt? The original Alone in the Dark is excellent for its time. It helped form the survival horror genre and was one of the first PC games to really get to grips with the new world of polygons. Parts 2 and 3 were okay, not groundbreaking but still worth a play if you enjoy a hit of PC nostalgia. Sadly, they have dated quite badly, but will be remembered fondly by those that played them at the time. The New Nightmare was a surprising resurrection of the series. It didn't add much new to the genre that the original helped kickstart, but I do feel that this is a game that still holds up very well today. It plays, looks and sounds great, so worth playing if you fancy a spooky night full of jump scares. As for anything past 2001, I would personally give it a miss. You're not going to get any more in the way of decent gameplay, so best save your money for another collectible you really care about. As for the Alone in the Dark movies, No, just no. Alone in the Dark certainly has its place in gaming history, particularly the original trilogy. The new style of adventure and excellent physical presentation make it memorable in gaming history. Sadly, the license has been badly treated over the years, and this is the real tragedy of Alone in the Dark. Each year we still flock to buy survival horror games looking for that hit of fear. If only the license could fall to a competent developer, either an HD remake of the original or simply a reimagining with the original principles of the series could once more make this franchise relevant. I hope that you've enjoyed this mini-series. Please let me know in the comments your experiences of playing Alone in the Dark.
Are you afraid of the dark?
Sometimes.